Mary, who is our developing director for the funding department. That is phenomenal with training individuals how to write grants and be successful at it, just not only for her next chapter, but on a professional level. So this is a very valuable information that you're getting, and most people usually pay for these type of courses. We are recording it, so we're not going to allow any distraction or background noises. So as we are recruiting new volunteers, we're going to be sending this training video for them to come on board. So Mary, I'm going to mute myself and then you're on.
Okay. Hi guys, my name is Mary Mitchell Foster and I am in charge of the funding development team, and I have the privilege of working with some phenomenal volunteers who help us in generating funding so that we can fuel the mission to her next chapter. So thank you for being with us today. Today we're going to be covering some fundamentals of basic grant writing. Feel free to use the Q&A function throughout the Zoom webinar, and our host will alert us to questions and help us in getting you those answers. You'll also receive some resources after this, but without further ado, we're going to go ahead and get started. So this is the grant writing fundamentals. And as you all know, it can be very fierce competition-wise for nonprofits out there. They're competing for funds. Every charity has pretty much a good mission and background, and you're competing for a pool of monies from philanthropists, government organizations, foundations to help fuel our program. So there's grant giving bodies out there, but you have to be able to adhere to the lingo in the industry and the best practices for grant writing out there. So although grant proposals shouldn't ever be considered as your sole source of funding, they definitely play a very significant role in your overall success. You have to have money to make your programs fueled. So grants to be successful should be a part of your overall plan. You should have a solid program, a detailed calendar, a team of dedicated grant writers, and resources. I'm proud to say that Her Next Chapter has all of that in place. Grants come from a variety of different sources, such as foundations, corporations, government agencies. They all pretty much require the same information. They just like it presented in a different way sometimes. So today we're going to be looking at the three main types of proposals that you will most likely write if you're going to help on the grant writing committee. The first one is a letter of inquiry. Now, a letter of inquiry usually goes to a foundation, a private foundation usually, and in essence, it's just a way that you pique a funder's interest into your program or your nonprofit or what you're driving for your mission. So you choose, might send several letters of inquiry out to a number of different foundations to see if our project or our platform fits with their mission and aligns. So a letter of inquiry typically runs 2 to 3 pages, and with the letter of inquiry, you and the funder explore whether or not your idea is of interest to them. So many foundations prefer to receive a letter of inquiry just because sometimes it's only a couple pages long versus an 8 to 10 page full proposal. So they quickly assess whether a project's a good fit for them. Sometimes they're unsolicited, meaning you are reaching out to the funder to see if they have funds available. Sometimes organizations or foundations will not publish grants openly, and so you have to probe them, and you probe them through the letter of inquiry. So our nonprofit might initiate the letter just to test the waters with somebody that seems like they align with our platform. And in a letter of inquiry, you're going to describe the need. You're going to outline the plan that we're going to meet to get to that need, and we're going to specify how the project fits in the funder's priorities. We also have a full proposal, which is the second type of grant we're going to talk about. today. A full proposal is usually when you think of a typical grant that you might have heard people referring to grants being tedious or lengthy, and they can be daunting in the beginning, but once you've completed one complete full proposal, it's pretty much cutting and pasting after that if you've got your resources in order, which again, I am proud to say that we do. We have a master grant reference, which we're going to review at the end. And most of the research has been done for our individual e-chapters as well. So a full proposal follows a fairly standard format that includes a cover letter, a summary of the project, the amount of money that we're going to be asking from the funder. Proposals can range pretty lengthy, anywhere from 8 to 20 pages. But you want to be sure to follow the funder's directive. So on their criteria that they usually list on their website, they're going to tell you exactly what key parts of the grant that they would like to see. So there could be, in essence, 20 different, and we're going to review them, 20 different sections to a grant. But some funders only want to see 3 or 4. So they want you to go in length about your budget. Some of them would like to see a snippet from each of them. So you have to research each different funder or grant presenter as to what they like to see. Many funders, especially the larger ones, they now require grant seekers to use online applications to submit their proposals versus in the past it was pretty antiquated and a lot of form filling out. Thankfully, it's not like that anymore. There are special considerations for online applications, though, that you have to understand their platform and taking your time to write each section offline first, and then triple checking your work before you submit it. So as many of you that are already on the line that have written grants before know, it will allow you to save your place and save your work so you don't have to finish it in one sitting. And and I really like that. So you might, it usually takes an experienced grant writer about 2 to 2.5 hours to write a full proposal. So you might not have 2.5, 3 hours to dedicate at one time. You might have 30 minutes. So you sit down to start writing and you save your work and come back to it. And it's through a portal where you log in with a password and a login. So a letter proposal is the third thing we're going to talk about. And it's similar to a letter of inquiry, but corporations, it's just an abbreviated full proposal. So the letter of inquiry is unsolicited and we're reaching out to them. A full proposal and a letter proposal is where they have made a public announcement of the grant and we are basically putting our hat in the ring for that grant. So a letter proposal is just a smaller version of the full proposal, and corporations often prefer the letter. It's kind of more formal, kind of more intimate. You're drafting a letter to them. You might be writing to a corporate foundation asking for monetary gifting or proposing a sponsorship. Usually a letter proposal is how you ask for in-kind donations or for them to sponsor a particular program where they are called the flagship presenter. A letter is usually 3 to 4 pages, or should never exceed 3 to 4 pages, and it describes your overall project, it explains the organization, and it includes the actual monetary request or in-kind request for sponsorship. Although a letter proposal may seem easier, it is challenging to state your case in a briefer format. So this is what we call like the elevator pitch. You've got to tell them why her next chapter is so great, but in less time. So we're going to talk about the elements of a typical letter of inquiry, which is the first type of grant we spoke about. So the introduction can sometimes be referred to as the executive summary, and it's basically just exactly that, an introduction of us, an executive summary. It includes the name of our organization, the amount we're requesting, and the description of our project. You also want to explain here how we fit with the funder's guidelines or their interest or how we align with them. The next section could be considered the background, the history, or the organizational description. Every grant will refer to it as something different, but basically it's just our organization's ability to tell our story here on our programs and to tell them who we are, making sure that we connect with them. So you'll want to use verbiage from their direct website where if they're talking about the fact that they are the preferred children or preferred women or whatever they're talking about that they prefer, you're going to want to describe how we align with their mission there. The next section is basically just a statement of need or telling why we are reaching out to them, explaining to them why we need the money. And here you talk about some statistics as far as our target population, the geographic area we're going to serve. This is the only part of a letter of inquiry that typically has statistics. So in the past, grants used to have statistics. They were heavily factual. They've pretty much over the course of the last decade got away from that. It's more about telling the story and painting the picture and implementing their mission into align with ours. So it's more passion driven and more story oriented versus factual. You do want to, however, include some statistics or demographics in your proposal. The next one is called methodology, or it's basically the solution, overall the program, just how are we going to solve the need? If the need is domestic violence, how are we going to solve that? How are we going to offer these women an opportunity to rebuild their futures? So you describe the project in detail here, and you take away any objectives from our project and the program. This is where we will use or utilize the subject matter experts brochure and program content heavily, which I'll go into detail later on in the presentation. So other funding sources or other partnerships, if we have those, we'll want to put those after the program, meaning if we're going to be partnering with a battered women or a shelter, we're going to want to include their mission as well, or where our other funding sources are coming from. Grant funders usually do not want to be your only funding source, so they want to see that you've done some other fundraising, or if you're presenting them a budget of you're going to need $6,000, you'll want to outline that we're already halfway there or 25% there and how we anticipate to get the rest. So they don't want to fund the project 100% by themselves, basically. And then you'll conclude with your summary, and that's just basically restating the intent of your project. Here is an opportunity to pull on heartstrings. You'll include any attachments from their guidelines. Sometimes they ask for financials or our board of directors, things like that. We can rely on leadership from Her Next Chapter to get that. There will be some times that you're asked to provide stuff that's not readily available. Most of the stuff that you're going to need is in monday.com, and we'll go over that at the end as well. So that was the letter of inquiry. So the next thing is a grant proposal, the full grant proposal. What does that consist of? Now remember, this is the one that could be anywhere from 8 to 20 pages long. So whereas the executive summary was also in the letter of inquiry, but it was only 2 to 3 sentences, your executive summary on a grant proposal could be anywhere from 2 to 3 paragraphs or 2 to 3 pages. And that's what you're going to start with, is your proposal summary. So each of these sections are just going to be more detailed or outlined more in detail for the full grant proposal.
Now,
Okay.
Mary, can I interject just for a second? Just
Sure,
give you a chance to
absolutely.
take a breath. And this is Lady Schaap speaking. Can you kind of give a brief overview what we already have, because we did, to let the volunteers know that we have all of this content available to them?
Yes, ma'am. I was going to open it up for them at the end. So basically, all of this work has already been done for you in a master grant proposal that's 27 pages long. All you will basically be required to do is to go in there and cut and paste relevant content to your grant and your criteria and make it flow, which is why you don't have to have grant writing skills. You can have editorial, storytelling, literature, grammar, or just a passion to serve. Because all of the legwork per se has been done, and our fantastic editorial team has already put their spin on it. So like Lady Shap said, we will literally be handing that to you, and then you will be picking and choosing how you're going to tell the narrative. So the proposal summary, like I said, is usually 2 to 3 paragraphs, and it should include the amount of funding we're requesting and give a general description of what the funds are going to be used for. The organizational description and the history, just like it's on our website, tells about how Lady Shap started as the founder of Her Next Chapter, and it should be 1 to 4 pages in length. Right now, we have 1 page. We have not had to do a grant proposal that has required any more than 6 pages. Those are very few and far between, and they're for the larger repetitive grants that we're not to that particular aspect yet. So you won't have to be writing anything in great length. The largest grant we have on our calendar for 2020 is 6 pages. But again, all of that content we already have for you. So in the organization depiction and history, we're going to not only give the history and background of the organization and where we have come from, but also a particular program. For example, we launched last year our first Her Financial Literacy. So this year we would talk about the successes from that first fundraising initiative and how much we raised and what we were able to achieve would be in there. The background section is usually 2 to 5 pages in length for a full grant proposal, 1 to 2 for a smaller. It provides the reader basically with an explanation of just the problem, how it's been created for the need, what's going on, what's existing in society, and how we're going to combat that. You can also include supplemental income, our supplemental appendix, like our brochures and statistics that we have that don't pertain to Her Next Chapter, but pertain to the vices in society that we're trying to help overcome. For example, it might include the number of single mothers, how they have increased in the last year. It might include the victims of domestic violence in a particular county, that type of information. The project description is the program narrative. This is where most of your meat and potatoes, because you really want to sell the project and describe the program into detail. The project description also can include information about the staff or the subject matter expert who's going to be working on it or leading the e-chapter and their experience and their qualifications to lead the e-chapter and why they were chosen. And we have all of their background and bios for you as well. The project timeline or implementation in the timeline is basically a reason I gave an example of this one is to let you know then in a full grant proposal what they would want. So if you're talking about a project implementation timeline, they're going to want to know what an activity is, how many enrolled participants you're going to have, how much does it cost per month to sponsor them, and they're going to want to know dates and times and things like that. So it's pretty factual. This is a part where you might have to reach out to myself or Lady Shap or leadership to get this information. You don't necessarily have to have that. That's the beauty of when you're writing the grant. You start and you put as much into it as you can. We turn it over to me to help vet, and then as a team we help add to it, and then after I've given it the approval, we send it to the editorial team, and Suzanne and her team put their twist on it and make it all nice and pretty and send it back to us. We put the final bow on the package and send it to Lady Shap. So the budget is the next one, and Lady Shap will be heavily, will be heavily involved in that one. And that's just because, you know, each e-chapter that we're trying to start, we're going to have a different number of participants that we're targeting. So you won't have to come up with as much of that information. Sometimes we're going to do partnerships with sister partner alignments. There are some grantors that they require a specific zip code or demographic or income median to be served, and we don't house that information currently, but our sister partners do. So sometimes we'll be the one to go seek the grant out and then partner with them and use their residents or their constituents in spending the grant funds. And then attachments, those are optional, but I suggest them because the attachments are like the brochures, every e-chapter, we are putting together a brochure that's done very nicely, has really good professional content and just the right amount of white space. I mean, each one that I've seen so far has been fantastic. So we definitely, anytime we can toot our own horn or showcase how professional we are, we would want to. So we would attach that brochure that goes with that e-chapter that we're asking for funds on, including the subject matter expert's bio or maybe their content that they're presenting sometimes. Now, sometimes we're going to ask for general funds, just overall women programming. Sometimes we're going to ask for funds specifically for a program. Sometimes we're going to ask for operational funds, and sometimes we're going to ask for things like videography or journalism or in that regard. So every grant is different. You will review the grant calendar and it tells you, and I'll pull that up here in a second, it tells you who the grantor is, gives you the website, you'll research their website, and then you'll dive into the master grant reference in order to complete your grant. And we'll go over that here in just a minute. So basically the fundraising department puts the fun in fundraising, and we want you to have a good time. We want you to get something out of it. Ultimately, it's part of the heart of the organization. We have to have the funding in order to fuel the program. So it's a very integral part to the success of Her Next Chapter. Are there any questions so far before I pull up the resources?
Okay, I just wanted to chime in as well.
Yes, ma'am.
As the questions are coming in, none has come in yet. You mentioned our brochures, and I wanted to just chime in just a little bit regarding the brochures. We have 4 or 5 categories that we're focusing on for 2020. Our first category is the Career Summit with a one-day job fair that we're looking to do the first part of 2020. And all of our brochures that are created professionally by professional expert marketing, our marketing team that Her Next Chapter has. And for new volunteers or those that are on the call today that do not realize, every department touches just about everything that we do. And for instance, like Mary said, the brochures. So we're focusing, our goal is focusing on career, which we have a subject matter expert coach already in on our team or staff that conducts monthly career oriented type of coaching with members that are assigned to her. So that's the first part. The second quarter, you might say, we'll be focusing on wellness. And then the third quarter, we are focusing on financial literacy, which we do already have a subject matter expert coach that teaches financial literacy, budgeting, saving, those type of things, with members attached to her as well. And then the fourth quarter, we're looking to do what we call discovery, self-discovery, and those are usually women that are going through some type of transition. She might be going through a divorce or just coming out of domestic violence or something in that area. So each quarter we're focusing on not only just getting grants to support those programs, but we're doing physical events to support those programs. And just for your knowledge, I would want to know this: where does the money go, or how much of the money, how is the money allocated? The money that we are raising is to help support membership. So like our first fundraiser, we did financial literacy, and that money was allocated to support women that are interested in financial literacy. So that's our main focus, is to support members. And when we say that we're interested or seeking to align ourselves with sister partners, which are other nonprofit organizations like domestic violence or one of those type of organizations, we will be giving membership to them to hand out to their camp of women that can use our services as an extension of what they already offer, but taking it to the next level on a virtual level. So I just wanted to touch on that in the event some of you are not aware, but also more so for new volunteers when they're watching this video to get a bigger picture exactly how we're looking to write grants. Sponsorship is as part of the events that we'll be doing throughout 2020, and also what do we do with that money, which is geared towards membership. Mary, did you want to add anything?
No, ma'am, I think that's perfect. Surely we have some questions though, because I didn't want to just talk so fast that I lost some people, or is everybody basically in tune with what we're going to be doing or what we're requesting of you? Yeah. Okay, well, great. So at this time, I'm going to pull up and show you what a master grant application and a calendar looks like. See if it'll let me share it here.
And while you're doing that, Jocelyn had a question regarding, Jocelyn's question for me was, what happens per quarter? Jocelyn, I was saying each quarter, because we have like four or five categories, which is career and entrepreneur kind of linked together, the wellness, health and wellness, financial literacy, and then self-discovery. So each quarter we're focused on doing a sponsorship fundraiser live event in Dallas. And the first sponsorship event that we're focused on doing is for the career, it's called Career Summit, with a one-day job fair for women only. And we're looking to do that hopefully by April, I think, which is not really in the first quarter. But so while Mary is over finding grants, she also is working with sponsorship to help fund our sponsorship events, which we will be doing one each quarter. I hope that answered your question. And then I have another question. Okay. Great.
Okay, is there any more questions so far? I am going to pause the recording real quick, Lady Shap.
Okay. All right. And then just you can go ahead and put on, and then just tell me where you want me to go as you're speaking.
So as you can tell, in a minute, Lady Shap is going to give us an overview of Monday.com. But for right now, you see where it says grants and to create the master grant database and calendar. There's a link there, a Google Docs link that she's going to click on, and it's going to pull up our master calendar. The unique thing about this is you can be from anywhere. It's live, and it records the content that you're editing live as you do it wherever you're at for the different participants. So if you could click that for us now, Lady Shap.
Okay, and I just wanted to add for the viewers that Monday.com, which you probably would have gotten a link to or get invited to, is a project management tool that we use to manage all the moving parts in her next chapter. And again, it makes sense because we are virtual, and we have volunteers from all over the United States and outside of the United States. So just help us everyone to keep track of their assignments and know what is expected of them. And also give us an opportunity to make sure that everything is actually getting done according to schedule. So each department has their own what we call board, and this is the Funding Development Board that Mary manages. And by you being part of the funding department, you would be invited to this board. And And so you want me to click on create grant?
Yeah, scroll down a little bit. I'm gonna piggyback off what you just said. So there's additional resources. As you can tell, we have Grant Station. There's not a need right now to find any more grants because we've already identified them. But like for when we start preparing for next year's grant calendar, you guys might be helping look for grants in Grant Station, which is a very valuable tool in the nonprofit world that we've taken an investment in for you to utilize. So it makes it easier to find the grants out there so you don't have to do a lot of searching. So your time and your effort can be really heavily concentrated on the need versus the legwork. So the very first link is our master grant calendar. And this is broke down by local and national. So the very first page here tells you an overview of the deadlines for the grants. So that first column is the dates. It's divided by quarter. Then you have the actual funder. So as you can tell, our first one at January 1st, Texas Women's Foundation. Now, January 1st is an internal deadline. Whenever you're creating a grant calendar, you always give an internal deadline of at least a month before the actual deadline. You don't want to put it too far out because sometimes you'll have current events or the status of the organization that needs to be included. But 30 to 60 days out is not bad at all. So it tells you what type of program or grant it is. So we just talked about the letter of inquiry, the form grants, the full proposals, and you can tell even our events we include in there. Then it tells you the program or the focus. This is going to align with our career, the career development like Lady Shap was just talking about, or domestic violence, the health and wellness. This aligns with our individual e-chapters or the need. And this is specifically targeted because that grantor or funder has a passion or an interest in that area as well. So we're aligning to their interest. And then the amount of the grant, sometimes they tell you, we'll give you 5,000, we'll give you 10,000. Sometimes they just post an open grant, but you can go and look and see what other types of amounts they've given in the past. And so it's typical that you know what you could be asking for. If you have a smaller foundation that typically only gives $5,000 and $10,000 grants, we're not going to go ask them for 50 because they would rather give 10 people an opportunity versus one. So if they're not accustomed to giving $50,000 grants, we shouldn't ask for that because we wouldn't be considered. So research is very, very important. If you're interested in research for next year, you can get with me individually and we'll definitely train you in that area as well. The good thing is all the research has been done for you this year. So this first tab of the calendar is the overall summary. The next tab just includes the grant guidelines for each grant as we write them and things that we need. Remember, I told you that you might need something from leadership. We could request that on this tab or the next tab that says tasks and what you're waiting on. And who's in charge or responsible in that deadline. So these are individual tasks within the grant that you need. Sometimes there might not be anything in there. You might have everything that you need within the master grant reference, which we're going to review here in a minute. We have it broke down by national, local, and government on the next three tabs just to see if we're going for a national grant, something here locally, which we could be partnering someone, or a government grant. Government grants are very hard to obtain. And they take a great deal of time. So we chose to start with the more local and national ones to start with. But these tabs will tell you in detail who you're contacting. It will give you the website of the organization. It will give you deadlines, phone numbers, and then a snippet of their interests, like what is their goal or their mission. And so this will be beneficial when you're researching. So the first thing you should do is review the national and the local funding sources and see something that piques your interest. If you're going to be on the grant writing team, you'll be looking at Q1 and Q2, so specifically Q1, and then picking another grant from Q2, you'll find a grantor that interests you by going to their website, researching them, see if you're interested, and then you would put your name that you're going to be writing that grant, and then you would start your grant. Sometimes you start in their online portal where you're filling it out online. Sometimes you'll just take a grant template on a Word document and submit it that way for approval. Every grant will be different. So Lady Shap, if you can go to the master reference for them at this time so they can see the content that's already been put together for them. Now,
is that on this one here, or go back to monday.com?
The second link under funding. So you can close that one out, or you can click that tab up there. Yep, yes, ma'am. And yep, there you go. So the second tab is the actual master grant application or reference guide. And remember, we talked about all those little individual topics that you could possibly have in a grant in the presentation, including collaborators, partners, history, background. So this is verbiage that's already approved from leadership and the editorial team that the grant writers have started writing. As you are writing grants, if you come up with content that needs to be added in here, by all means, you can add content in there. As well as we onboard new subject matter experts with new skill set and programs to offer, this is a working document. So I believe it's like 27 pages. Essentially what we need is all those topics for a general proposal, all those topics for the career development, all those topics for financial literacy, all those topics for each individual e-chapter that we have. So it could be a very cumbersome document, but you're going to be picking and choosing the content that is just relevant to the grant that you are writing. But as you can tell, it's a very good starting source, including statistics that are external, like that's flowing on the page now. And you will take this content and piece it together, start to tell the story, and then add your creative spin on it. So you might take, cut and paste what Her Next Chapter provides coaching programs to women for, and then start to elaborate off that and how will it intrigue that individual funder. And then you will submit your grant to me, and I will look over it to make sure all the key aspects are there. And I will either present it to the team so we can, if we need a little more meat to it, to add to it, or send it directly to Suzanne and she will assign it to someone on her team, or she'll do it herself and get it edited for us and send it back to us. And then we will send the final to Lady Shap for approval, and then we will submit the grant. Sometimes they want it submitted online. Sometimes they want it submitted in writing. Sometimes they want it emailed. Sometimes they want it faxed. Every grant will be different. But because the most of the legwork is already done for you, you could literally write a grant from the calendar in anywhere from 30 minutes to 2.5 hours. There are no grants on the calendar that should take anybody longer than 2.5 hours. Maybe if you're starting out and you've never written a grant before, 3 hours at the most for a full proposal. Some things are gonna be a form grant where it's just asking you questions and it's 2 sentences each field. What are you gonna use the money for? How much do you need? They want you to upload your 501c3 status, and then you hit submit. But it's a matter of just getting them submitted because it is a numbers game. So your form grants, your national sources, your in-kind donation, there is no limit to those. We should be cranking those out. Your more local grants, we will want to take our time with, the ones like Texas Women Foundation, the Dallas Foundation, the Moody Foundation, things that are here locally in the DFW area. We don't want to taint our image like we're just applying to everybody in the local philanthropic community. However, in-kind donations, form grants, large corporations, those are unlimited. And if we could have somebody in helping just crank those out, as many as we could have, it's a numbers game. The more we apply to, the more likelihood we'll get something. So we truly appreciate your time and effort in this. We can't emphasize enough that we could not do this without you. You could be a writer, you could be a grant writer, you could be just somebody with a philanthropic heart, you could just be a mover and a shaker. You don't have to be a grant writer to write grants. As you can tell, you can be an editor. You just have to have a passion for it and the time to put it together.
Thank you, Mary, so much. Can you briefly, if we have time, just talk about the difference between well, you might have already covered it, the grants, the federal, the state?
Sure, not a problem. So you have foundations, you have corporations, you have private party, you have in-kind, you have national, local, and government. The government grants, usually they want audited financials, which is why we've kind of stayed away from them until we can get a couple programs under our belts. The government grants require a great amount of recording and auditing, and they're usually the larger dollar amounts, and they're usually repetitive grants, meaning you can get them year over year and then you can just reapply. However, there's a lot more work that goes into them, and they have a lot stricter guidelines. When you're using federal funding, they want to know intake of who you're serving, the demographics of the people that are going to be benefiting from the funds, just things that we currently don't have in place, not that we won't one day, and not that we can't, or not that we can't partner with or even implement ourselves. However, as a starting point, we've elected to work on primarily letters of intent or form proposals. We do have a couple full proposals on our calendar, but for the most part, we're writing grants 2 to 3 pages long, or we're filling out forms online is what we're doing at this time. Foundations, whether it be a private foundation or a corporation that has started a foundation, such as the Dallas Mavericks Foundation. Of course, the professional basketball entity is their main entity. However, they started a private foundation to distribute funds. And then you have like corporations like the Coca-Cola, things like that, that they give back. And sometimes that's monetarily and sometimes it's in kind. Like they might sponsor an event with food or beverages or whatever that it is that their service industry that they're in. So that's the different types of grants that we are working with right now. Lady Schaap?
All right, thank you so much. Is there any questions for Mary? We're going to wrap up.
I don't see any questions in the Q&A either, Elsie.
Okay, and Mary, can you tell when we usually meet the funding department?
So we were meeting on Monday. There were a couple individuals that expressed that Wednesday or Thursday would be better, and some individuals said that Wednesday was not possible. So we have chose to do Thursdays. We meet every other Thursday, 6:15 Central Standard Time. We do have some individuals that are out of the country. They're in a completely different time zone that still help contribute but aren't able to get on the meetings all the time. It would be ideal just to keep us all on one accord and on the same page to get on as many meetings as we can, which is why we have went to every other week instead of weekly. And I understand with the holidays and whatnot that, you know, some people had some other commitments, but definitely by the first of the year, we need to be up and cranking it out. At least we're asking for a commitment of 1 grant per month, which is 2 hours of your time per month. preferably 2 grants, which would only be no more than 5 hours, including meeting time, of a commitment from you.
And I have a question. Can you go over the letter of intent again?
Yeah, sure, not a problem. And I can actually pull it back up. So the letter of intent is also called a letter of inquiry. And basically, a letter of intent or inquiry is us reaching out to an organization that we've researched that we know gives money. They might not have what we call an open rec or an RFQ, which is like a request for proposal. Or they might not be advertising, or they might not have anything to the public open, but they still have funds to give. So we would do a letter to them, basically similar to writing a letter, just introducing ourselves, what we're doing, what we're about, why we need their help, how we would use their funding, and do they have any, this is the amount we would need, can you help sponsor this initiative? And then they would let us know we don't have any funding for the year, we've exhausted funding, or yes, we do have funding, we need you to fill out a grant proposal. So a letter of intent or a letter of inquiry is just that. It's us reaching out to fillers, piquing their interest, trying to get on their radar. Sometimes you complete an LOI knowing that their funds are exhausted, but you want to get your name out there. So by next grant cycle, you can apply. They don't like to tell people no several times. And so if they say, sorry, we've already closed our grant cycle, they're going to remember our name. It's just keeping Her Next Chapter abreast on their, so you don't look at a letter of intent or letter of inquiry denial as a loss, because it's not. I mean, you usually go into it knowing that it's not even a 50-50 chance. It's 10 to 20% chance that they're going to say, yes, please submit a full proposal. So the letter of intent or letter of inquiry is usually your first introduction to that grantor or funder. And then they ask you to do a full grant proposal, which could be a long form, or they'll say, sure, apply online, and they'll give you a code or they'll give you a voucher to go online to apply. But it's basically them granting you permission. Very, very few foundations do what they call open recs, where just they're inundated with grants. They want to have a selection process, because usually the people that review the grants are, I mean, they're people also. So when you're reviewing grants, you don't have to be very, you don't have to use an extensive vocabulary. In fact, they recommend that you write your grants on an 8th grade level. The people that you are writing the grant to, they're not always college educated. Sometimes they are volunteers that have a passion for that organization, and they're on a grant review committee. So you always write a grant with an 8th to 9th grade reading level. Now, so contrary to what some people believe with inundating a grant proposal with verbiage and large verbiage, if they can't understand it, then they're not going to be interested. So you should always write a grant on an 8th to 9th grade level. And after the letter of inquiry, you either fill out a full proposal, or you fill out a form proposal, or they tell you when you can apply next year, which is really what you're looking for. Because what you do with your letter of inquiry denials from your first year grant calendar, you start to fill your second year grant calendar, your third year grant calendar with what they respond. And it's less research that you have to do the next year.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Mary. This was very informative, and I hope that the audience that joined us today got some good information. We will be sending out to you a written guideline that we got from GrantStation, which is one of the tools that we use to do our research for grants, that a lot of professional grant writers use the same tool when they're searching for grants. So you will get a copy.